Picture this: Britain, 1955. A normal winter week. Nothing unusual. On Monday, the shops are full. Bread on the shelves, milk on the doorstep. By Thursday, queues form. By Friday, limits are imposed. 1 loaf per person. Milk deliveries cancelled. And by the weekend, something unthinkable happens. A modern country runs out of food. No war, no famine. How did Britain end up with empty shelves in just a few days? To understand how this could happen, you have to remember what Britain was like in 1955. The war was over, but the country was still recovering. Rationing had only recently ended. For the first time in years, people were getting used to full shelves again. Britain was rebuilding fast. Cities were growing. Millions depended on food arriving every single day. Most of it didn't come from nearby farms. It came by train, by lorry, on tightly timed deliveries. Britain no longer stored food. It moved it, continuously. As long as the roads were clear and the railways kept running, the system worked. But in the winter of 1955, the weather turned. Snow fell. Ice spread. Roads closed. Rail lines froze. And when transport stopped, the food stopped with it. The problem wasn't panic, and it wasn't poor planning. It was the weather. In early February 1955, the weather turned brutal. Heavy snow fell. Ice locked roads and rail lines in place. Temperatures stayed below freezing for days. Trains slowed, then stopped. Points froze. Carriages were stranded in open country. Lorries couldn't get through. Roads became impassable. Drivers turned back or abandoned their vehicles. Britain's food system depended on movement, and movement was exactly what the weather took away. When transport failed, deliveries failed. And when the deliveries stopped, the shelves were next. The change didn't happen all at once. It happened shelf by shelf. First, the milk disappeared. Morning bottles didn't arrive. Doorsteps stayed empty. Then bread. Shops opened as usual, but the shelves were already bare. Queues formed early. People waited in the cold, hoping the next delivery might come. By midweek, limits appeared. 1 loaf per customer. No second purchases, no explanations. Meat counters closed. Grocers shook their heads. I'm sorry, nothing today. Rumors spread faster than supplies. A delivery seen on one street. A shop that still had butter. People walked further, queued longer, waited anyway. By the end of the week, some shops had almost nothing left to sell. Not because Britain had no food, but because it couldn't reach the shelves. The shortages didn't hit everywhere the same way. In London and the industrial cities, things broke down fastest. Millions depended on daily deliveries. When the lorries stopped, there was nothing to fall back on. Queues grew longer each day. Tempers grew shorter. Some shops closed early, not because they were sold out, but to avoid the crowds. In rural areas, it was different. Villages still had local farms. Small shops knew their customers. Milk might be late, but it didn't vanish overnight. The gap widened quickly. In the cities, people waited. In the countryside, people managed. And the longer the crisis lasted, the clearer that divide became. When the shops couldn't provide, people turned to each other. Neighbors shared what they had. A bit of bread, some milk, anything that could stretch a meal. Meals became simpler. Soups made from leftovers. Bones boiled twice. Nothing was wasted. People improvised. Old recipes came back. Portions were smaller. Days were planned around food. If you had extra, you shared. If you had none, you asked. And for most people, that was the hardest part. But something changed. Doors that had stayed shut for years began to open. People talked. Help was offered quietly, without questions. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't easy. But it worked. The government couldn't ignore it. Emergency measures were announced. Supplies were prioritized. Essential routes were cleared first. Milk deliveries were given priority. Hospitals came before shops. Cities came before villages. The army was placed on standby. Emergency services worked around the clock. But there was a limit to what could be done. Snow still blocked the roads. Ice still froze the rails. And food still needed vehicles to move. The system was strained, not because of indifference, but because there simply wasn't enough capacity. The end didn't come with an announcement. It came with the weather. Temperatures rose. Snow began to melt. Roads slowly reopened. Trains started moving again. Lorries returned to their routes. Deliveries resumed. Milk reappeared first. Then bread. Then gradually, everything else. Queues shortened. Limits disappeared. Shops began to look normal again. But the relief was quiet. People didn't celebrate. They remembered how quickly things had vanished and how easily it could happen again. Looking back, this week is easy to dismiss. It didn't last long, and it didn't end in disaster. But it revealed something important. Britain didn't run out of food. It ran out of time. Modern cities don't store what they need. They receive it. Daily. Hour by hour. Remove transport for a few days and the shelves empty. It wasn't a war. It wasn't a famine. Just one broken link in the chain. And that's what makes it uncomfortable. Because the system hasn't changed as much as we think. It's faster, more efficient, and just as fragile. The week ended. Life went on. But the memory stayed. For a moment, Britain saw how thin the line really was between normal life and empty shelves. It wasn't a war. It wasn't a famine. Just one bad week. And it wasn't the last time Britain came close.